And welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Okay.
And we are looking at Torah Temimah. And because I can share two items, I'm going to also have my a dictionary, a Jastrow dictionary open. We'll see how that works, if that actually works that way. Yes. Okay, good. I think it is open on that if we need it. So of course, we have started Parshat Noach, and the very first verse of Parshat Noach, we went into the interesting verse and the fact that it's ambiguous. And here we are, Tamim, Noah is described as Tamim, right? Tamim haya bedorotav. So, uh, so uh, there we go. Milamed, this teaches us, Shenolad Noach Bahu, that Noah was born circumcised. And part of the reason for saying that is that when God gives Abraham the commandment to circumcise himself and the males in his household, he says, you he uses this word tamim, that you should walk in a pure way before me. And I think there are various uh, interpretations and mystical meanings behind the whole covenant of circumcision. And it's, excuse me, it's towards the end of Parshat Lech Lecha. So it's like two parshas down the road. Might be a while before we get to that actual section. So maybe I'll take a moment and discuss what I think are some of the ideas. So it's considered a brit, right? It's considered a covenant, and that is the covenant of the circumcision. And clearly it is on the male organ of reproduction, and that clearly there is significance to that. And the idea of it being circumcised, I believe, has to do with the idea of not living our lives in an animalistic kind of way. And that the perfection of the human being is that idea that we are born imperfect and that life is about trying to perfect ourselves. And certainly when it comes to our sexual behavior, we can, in fact, act like animals and allow our sexual appetites to control our behavior, or we can learn to control, or at least I sometimes use the metaphor of dancing with it, because no one's asking us to destroy it entirely, but at the same time, we're asking for it not to control us and to allow ourselves to control our appetites. And I think that's also involved clearly in the laws of kashrut as well. To some extent, it's also involved in the laws of Shabbat. There are all ways in which we have, in fact, a religious discipline, and the idea of that discipline allowing us to grow deeply in a spiritual kind of way. So we are not born perfect, and here we are given the opportunity, right, as human beings to perfect ourselves. In a way, one could look at it as a very great gift on the part of God. But in what sense is it a covenant? And I actually believe that it goes into the idea of immortality, that that ability to lessen the grip of this physical universe on us also releases us in a way to be open to that idea of immortality. Remember that if you go back to the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the whole idea of the snake and all that, it all is linked together with this idea of becoming sexually aware, etc. And so this in the covenant of circumcision, in a way, rolls back the notion that we became mortal and opens up the idea that we may actually be able to gain immortality if we understand what our purpose is in this life. So Noah is mahul. He's already mahul. He already has those kind of qualities that are required, you might say, to gain immortality. Even though there's nothing mentioned about Brit Milah here, it is only, as I said, at the end of Parshat Lech Lecha that we read about the covenant of circumcision. So let's take a look at what Torah Temimah has to say about this. And that is, I'm looking for, so what I'm looking for is Yodalit. By the way, the reference is Avot de Rabbi Natan. It is a interesting, extant midrash. Perik Bet means, chapter 2, and has very many interesting midrashim. So there really are a number of sources that are classic in terms of midrashim, interpretations of the Torah. Avot de Rabbi Natan is one of them. Another major source is called Midrash Rabbah. It is a midrash on the 5 books of Moses and the 5 Megillot. That is Esther. We'll look at, if we go according to the holidays, we'd say Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs. We'd be talking about the book of Ruth. We'd be talking about the book of Ecclesiastes. We'd be talking about, as I said, we've got Esther and also Eicha, the book of Lamentations. So those 5, what are called the Chamesh Megillot, the 5 scrolls. So this is Avot de Rabbi Natan. There's also a midrash called Tanchuma. I can assure you that I could probably spend the rest of the time we have together just going over all the names of these classical midrashic texts. So here we go. It would appear that by way of explaining this interpretation, regarding what is written in the tractate Nidarim in the Babylonian Talmud, which, by the way, is also a major source of midrashim. There was a collection of the midrashim in the Babylonian Talmud. It's known as the Ein Yaakov. And there's a collection simply of all the midrashim there. So in Tractate Nidarim, Lamed Aleph, page 31a on the A side of Lord, Gedola Milah. So it says there that the covenant of circumcision, that is the practice of circumcision, is great. It's huge. Shebechol hamitzvot she'asa Avraham Avinu, because regarding all the commandments which Abraham, our patriarch, performed, lo nikra tamid, he was not described as tamim, as perfect, ad shemal atzmo, until he circumcised himself. And I believe he was at the age of 99 when he did that. That certainly would have been a test of his faith at that particular point. One can only imagine. At any rate, he did other mitzvahs. He and Sarah performed another incredibly important mitzvah, which was Hachnasat Orchim, the act of hospitality, and specifically hospitality of strangers, not simply hospitality, but welcoming strangers into their home. It is an amazing, when you think about it, the qualities that are involved in the performance of that particular commandment, they are quite amazing. But he was only called Tamim after he performed circumcision. Shne'emar, as it states, and now he's going to quote the actual passage that I referred to in my introduction to this. Hitalech lefanai, go before me, or go yourself. This is a reflexive form of the verb halach, to go. So go yourself before me, lefanai, v'heye tamim, and be tamim, and be pure, or perfect. V'samichle, and right after that it says, ve'etna briti beini uveinecha, and then it says, I will give my covenant between me and you. Umekevan shemetuar Noach mehakadosh baruch hu, and because this is the Torah talking about Noah, so the way Torah Temimah describes it, because Noah is described, Mituar, he's described from the Holy One, blessed be He, B'Shem Tamim, in this term Tamim, pure. Limed mizeh, we learn from, lamad mizeh, forgive me, lamad mizeh, shenolad mahul. He learns from this that he was actually born, already circumcised. Achare, because develo zeh, were this not the case, lo nikra tamim, he would not have been called tamim, right, if he had not been born circumcised. Bedorotav. So here we are on a classic interpretation. Mahu Bedorotav. So the question is, what's this force of the word in his generations? What's it trying to inform us about? I mean, obviously the man is born in his generations, right? So what's the purpose of putting this word in? Rabbi Yochanan Amar. So we have the two great interlocutors, Rabbi Yochanan of the Gemara and Reish Lakish. And there's a whole story behind that relationship of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Very briefly, Reish Lakish started off life as a robber, as a bandit leader. And one day, Rabbi Yochanan met him, and he described to him, Rabbi Yochanan convinced Reish Lakish to become a disciple. And Reish Lakish, in fact, was brilliant. The man was brilliant. And we could certainly, associate various ideas of literary value to that whole relationship, that here a bandit leader becomes one of the great sages of the generation. There's, I think, a lot locked up in that particular idea. So anyway, Rabbi Yochanan taught Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish turned out to be a brilliant student. And then it turned out that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish became interlocutors. So we're seeing here an example of it. Rabbi Yochanan holds one point of view, and Reish Lakish holds a different point of view. And they are both well-founded, based on deep knowledge of the Torah. And there is a story about the fact that one day they actually got into a bitter quarrel, and wound up, to make that story a little shorter, Rabbi Yochanan wound up cursing Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish died. And Rabbi Yochanan went into a deep mourning because of the stimulation that he had with Reish Lakish. That's his colleagues, Rabbi Yochanan's colleagues, recognized that one of the reasons why Rabbi Yochanan was in such deep mourning is because he missed Reish Lakish so much, and he enjoyed the debates that he had with Reish Lakish. So they found another rabbi, a great scholar, to become Rabbi Yochanan's companion. And he studied with Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan would make a deep interpretation, and the scholar would say to him, he would understand what Rabbi Yochanan was saying, and he would agree with Rabbi Yochanan. And basically, Rabbi Yochanan turned on him. And basically, I can't quote exactly what he said, but basically it was to the effect that this was not what he was looking for. And the idea of debates being such a great way to learn and to deepen one's understanding and to open up one's mind. So there is this story, it's mentioned in the Talmud, about Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish was, his real name was Shimon ben Lakish, but he's known as Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Bedorotav, in his generations, velo bedorot acherim. In other words, it's a limitation. In other words, saying that Noah was perfect in his generation means only in his generations and not in other people's generations. And we mentioned this, we talked a little bit about that had he lived in Abraham's generation, there would have been no consideration for Noah. But There is a great idea there that regardless if you're living in a generation of wicked people and you're not perfect yourself, but you're better than all they are, that counts for quite a lot. And there's a great statement, a little sort of proverb that goes, Yiftach bedoro, kishmuel bedoro. Jephthah in his generation was like Samuel in his generation. And no one would question the idea of Samuel as being a very, very great prophet, early prophet. Jephthah was nowhere close to that, but Jephthah in his generation was as valuable as Samuel in his generation in terms of his worth, his essential worth. So, Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. For Reish Lakish Amar, but Reish Lakish says, Bedorotav, v'chol shekein bedorot acherim. And all the more so, the fact that he was able to be righteous in his generation, he would have been even more righteous in other generations where people weren't as wicked. So clearly, Reish Lakish is coming on to the idea of how influenced we are in the culture and the society in which we live, and that Noah was able to resist that temptation of being sucked into his own society, and that he withstood that, the temptations of that. And it's almost done, of course, unconsciously. And so that had he lived in other righteous generations, he would have been even more righteous than he was. So let's take a look here at Torah Temimah. So here we are. Laman Amar, for the one who is of the opinion, velo bedorot acherim, in other words, Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, right? And not in other generations. HaPerush hu, the explanation of this is, she'im haya bedorot tzadikim, that were he to live in the generations of righteous people, lo hayta tzidkato shelo nechshevet, his level of righteousness wouldn't have been taken into consideration. And according to Reish Lakish's opinion, where he says, and all the more in other generations, in the generations of other people, hakavana, the intention is, she'im haya bedorot shel tzadikim, had he lived in the generations of righteous people, haylo lomed mimidotehem, he would have learned from their qualities. But in the fact that now, in his generation, he only could observe the activities of wicked people. And we go on. V'lo mitba'er ma dachku l'Rabbi Yochanan Modachko l'Rabbi Yochanan lefaresh lignai, and it's not so clear as to what was forcing Rabbi Yochanan to explain this in a negative kind of way, as a criticism. But od she'efshar lefaresh l'shevach, since it's still possible to have interpreted it in a positive way. V'yesh lomar, and one could say, the Rabbi Yochanan l'shitate b'midrash Rabbah, right? That according to the position of Rabbi Yochanan, his position in the Midrash Rabbah, Amar, he said, Shem de Noach mechusar, or Amar Sham, forgive me, he says there in the Midrash Rabbah, de Noach mechusar emunah haya, that Noah in fact lacked faith. Shelo emin b'mabul, that initially he did not believe, in fact, that the flood was going to come. V'lachein, and for this reason, lo ba el hateva kol zman shelo shataf hamabul, that he actually did not enter into the ark as long as the flood wasn't coming down. The only time he did was when he couldn't have argued any other way. There was so much rainfall, the flood was on its way, and at this point he finally entered the ark. Ye'uyan Sham, you can check out that area, that's place in the Midrash Rabbah, Delim Lamad Kain, that's what he learned. Imkain, and if this is the reason, and I believe this is lamad and not limaid. Limaid would be he taught, but this is how he learned. This is what he learned. Imkain, and if this is the case, ledidei, according to his opinion, be'emet lo haita bo shleimut ha'emunah. Indeed, he did not. He, in truth, didn't was not complete of faith. His faith wasn't complete. Kamor b'tzadikim zulato, like other righteous people. For imkain, and if this is the reason, kasher halashon sadik tamim haya bedortav, and for that reason, this expression, righteous, perfect he was in his generations, that's, if he wasn't so faithful, why is he even called a tzaddik, right? V'lachein hesiv halashon bedortav, and for that reason, Rabbi Yochanan is saying that that's the reason why this word bedorotav was put into that verse. Velo bedorot acherim, right? And that's, I'm thinking what this is meaning is that Rabbi Yochanan interprets this expression bedorotav as velo bedorot acherim, and not in other generations or the generations of others, lohorot bazeh, to teach through this al maniat shleimut zikato, regarding the limits of the completion of the wholeness of his righteousness. Ve'iyein od, and check further, Mashe katuv lekaman, what is written later on, bepasuk tet zayin, right? This would be verse 16, and this would be number 25. The number here is he's referring to these numbers here. That's what he's referring to. V'da, and no, demiseder hatfilah lemusaf de Rosh Hashanah, and know that from the prayers, right, of Rosh Hashanah, of the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, Kafi hanireh, it appears, hichriya kaman amar bedorotav lignai, that it would indicate that according to the Machzor, right, that the author of that prayer in Musaf would tend to follow and understand the word bedorotav as a criticism of Noah. Sheken katav sham, because there it's written in the Machzor, v'gam et Noach be'ahava zacharta. There it says, and v'gam, and also Noah in love did you remember. V'yitpatku b'davar, v'tifakdehu b'davar Yeshua, and you paid attention to him, right? You read in by saving him, right? V'rachamim, right? So b'davar Yeshua v'rachamim, in through an act of salvation and mercy, b'haviacha et moha beibul, when you brought the waters of the flood, l'shachet kol basar, to destroy all flesh. Mipnei roa malalehem. This is all taken from the Machzor, right? From the wickedness of their deeds. Al ken zichrono ba'alefanecha. And for this reason, his remembrance came before you. Halashon alkain, and this expression alkain, therefore, a mavuar, right? And it's not so clear. It's not clear. Al masovev v'nimshach. What are we saying? What do we mean by therefore? Right? There needs to be some precedent, and it's not clear exactly what the precedent is to say, therefore you came to him with salvation and mercy. Omnam, however, im mikevan lahadrasha bedorotav lignai, if it was saying al kain, therefore, for this reason, you came in mercy and in salvation. If we're understanding bedorotav lignai as a negative comment about Noah, right, as a criticism, yit paresh halashon, then we can understand why it's saying you had to come on Noah, with mercy and salvation, because he needed the mercy, right? He needed the mercy. V'ha'inyan shenoach b'zchut atzmo, and the idea that Noah, on his own merit, lo haya kidai, was not worthy lehipaked b'davar Yeshua, to be remembered with an act of salvation. V'rak k'shezachar HaKadosh Baruch Hu ma'aseh ra'im shel anshe doro, and it was only after God remembered or took note that of the wicked deeds of the people of his generation, Zachar oto l'tova. At that point, then he remembered him for good, remembered Noah for good. Shel umatam hayat tzadik. Why? Because in contrast to them, he was a righteous person. Umusav lefize halashon alkain, and for this reason, this expression alkain, therefore, right, is dependent al halashon mipnei roa malehem, and therefore it's based on the fact of the wickedness of their deeds. Therefore. Ulefi hamavuar b'Yerushalmi, and according to what is explained in the Jerusalem Talmud, let's see, I'm going to say alzeh, maybe alzeh, regarding this. Perek, no, Avodah Zara. There we go. It's the tractate Avodah Zara, Perek Allah, the first chapter, Halacha Bet, the second halacha. It's the way the Jerusalem Talmud is divided up. Ubevayikra Rabbah, and in Leviticus Rabbah, this is the Midrash Rabbah that I mentioned before, right? This is the Midrash Rabbah on Leviticus. Rosh Perek, I believe, this is the beginning of chapter Kaftet of chapter 29. De Mesader Hatfilah Ata Zocher Urav. Okay, that the one who actually composed these prayers, there's a mention as to who the author was of these prayers, who Rav. It was a Amora by the name of Rav. Rav is one of the greatest Amoraim mentioned in the Talmud, Babylonian Amorah. The Yadua, and it's known, the Rabbi Yochanan Kibel Merav. And we understand, right, it is known that Rabbi Yochanan learned the tradition from Rav. And he gives you the reference, Hulin Tzadik Hey Beit. It's in the tractate Hulin on page 95b. The Rambam and Maimonides, Bahakdama, and I'm looking to this. I'm not sure what this abbreviation stands for. I would have to go. All right. Let me think if I can. Right, but it's Hakdama means his introduction. Right, and this is, I'd have to see what this is, what this work was of the Rambam. Okay, Imkain, and if this is the case, Azil Rabbi Yochanan b'shitat Rav Rabo. Okay, and in that case, Rabbi Yochanan was going in the with the position of Rav, his teacher. Right. Uma shekatuv bedorotav velo bedoro, and what is written, the way it's expressed, in his generations, and not bedoro. Oh, why it says his generations, velo bedoro, and it doesn't say and his generation, right? In the katav besif, I'm looking at this, besfurano. I'm not sure what, I'm trying to figure out what this was. Or Sipurenu, right? It was written in our story. Mipnei shehaya b'miktzat Torah shel Metushelach v'shel Lemech, and the reason is that he lived. It says his generations. Why? Because he lived partially in the generation of Methuselah. He also lived in the generation of Lamech, uledati ein ze maspik. But he says this isn't really sufficient. This isn't a good enough explanation. Sharei kol adam behemshech yemei chayav, because when it comes to any human being in the course of the days of his life, yesh lo dor kabir mimenu, v'tzair mimenu layamim. So I'm trying to think what he means to say here, but I think what he's saying is that there are people in his generation that are, could be older than him and younger than him when it comes to the days, right? In other words, you're always, no matter when you live, they're always going to live in more than one generation in the course of your life, if you have a normal lifespan. The Omnam Efshar Lomar, and so consequently, one could say, the Balashon Zeh, that this expression of Dorotav and not Doro comes L'Ramez Mashikatuf Harambam. It alludes to what the Maimonides wrote, but in his Moreh Nevuchim, in his Guide to the Perplexed, the Perek Mem Zayin in chapter 47, Mechelek Sheni. There's two parts, and in part two of the Moreh Nevuchim, this is the chapter number 47. She'orech hashanim shel hadorot harishonim, that the length of the years, remember those early generations had very, very long years, that the length of those years of those early generations, Sheba Torah, that are in the Torah, harak beyechidim, it only applied to individuals, Haniskarim the Torah, who are actually mentioned in the Torah. In other words, there were lots of other people, but in the Rambam's opinion, those people lived a normal lifespan. And as to the people who lived hundreds and hundreds of years, it only applied to those people who are mentioned specifically. That is the Rambam's position. Usha'ar b'nei Adam, and the other human beings, Bedorot Hahem, during those generations, Hayu Chayim be'erech mispar hashanim harigilim etzleinu. They actually lived more or less the number of years that we are normally in what's called the normal lifespan for us to Ye'uyan Sham. And there you could check it out. And I see that we are out of time, so I am going to stop the share, and we will try and pick this up next time we meet. So, okay. Any thoughts before I stop the recording?